There we go. So, welcome everyone to this evening's speaker series. Tonight we have Maura MacNeil joining us, and she is able to do so with through New Hampshire Humanities to Go grant, which is fantastic. And we're so glad that you could join us here this evening. Maura is a author and editor and professor, and I will let her speak to anything else on her resume that she would like to share with us. So, again, thank you so much for being here this evening,
Great.
Maura. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for inviting me. Yeah. Um, so this is an interactive workshop. So you're going to be writing a little bit. There are a series of prompts I'm going to give you. And in terms of the description of what I do, and I can just read it off my notes just to give a parameter. Um, what we do in this hour-long session is we're going to explore how our family histories can be preserved through the stories that we tell specifically. I don't separate our family stories that we have about family from our own lives. I think that that's really important. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. We're shaped by stories. That's where I come from in terms of just my own academic research and just as a writer as well. And just this first slide shows some pictures of some places that are important to me. Washington, New Hampshire. Grandparents had a summer home there where I spent a lot of time growing up. A land grant from my great grandfather from Nova Scotia, which is where my paternal side of the family's from, and I've traveled there a number of times to little town where everyone's a MacNeil, which is sort of funny. And then other pictures of family relatives. And there's just my brief bio. We're just going to skip over that. So there are lots of writers who have influenced me in terms of my thoughts about writing about family and memory specifically. So I'm going to just read through some of these quotes. Ocean Vuong, I don't know if any of you are familiar with his writing. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous. It's a beautiful book. It's fiction, but it's really autofiction. It's really based on his own experience as a refugee, growing up as a child of a Vietnamese refugee. And he says, some people say history moves in a spiral, not the line we have come to expect. And I think that that's a really important thought to keep in mind. Stories are not linear. And I think working with so many people over the past decade who are writing their family stories, a lot of people come in thinking that there's this correct way to write about family and that it starts at the beginning and it has a very specific middle and then it has a conclusion. And I think that it's important for people to allow themselves to meander a bit, because especially when we're relying on our memory or others people's memory doesn't work in sort of this straight line. It can often spiral. Tobias Wolff says memory has its own story to tell, and we'll talk a little bit about that idea later. And Meredith Hall, I really suggest her book Without a Map. It's a really beautiful memoir about growing up in small town New Hampshire in the 1960s. And she says, once you have decided to write your life, you must be ready to tell the truth. And what you think is the truth right now may not be the truth that needs telling. And I often think of writing about family, memory, place as a form of archaeology. I really love that metaphor. We go in and we see, okay, there are pieces and parts that we've got. Maybe we've got, a document or photographs. But once we start digging, we often don't know what we're going to find. And, there's all these different pieces, and it's up to us to figure out how they fit together. So again, that sort of the archaeological dig is something that I always think about. David White, again, these are some of my favorite writers who have just some really wonderful things to say about writing and memory. And he says each one of us has a unique signature inherited from our ancestors, our landscape, our language, and beneath it, a half hidden geology of existence, memories, hurts, triumphs, and stories in our lineage that we have not yet been fully told. Each one of us is also a changing seasonal weather front, and what blows through us is made up not only of the gifts and heartbreaks of our own growing, but also of our ancestors and the stories consciously and unconsciously passed to us about their lives. And this ties into there's this idea of ancestral memory. We think of, we inherit certain features. People could say, oh my gosh, Maura, you look exactly like your great grandmother, the same nose or the same ears or eyes. But there's also that emotional landscape that we also inherit. So I think that that's also an important thing to consider when we're thinking about writing about family. Linda Hogan, nonfiction writer, creative nonfiction writer, poet, strong environmentalist. She says, walking, I am listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. I love that idea. And this picture is my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and her sister, who was nicknamed Dutch. Just this picture, I just love. I love this idea of that, our parents and grandparents or great grandparents, if we knew them, had this life before us, so they were young once. So, and so the questions that, we ask ourselves is, what family stories do you carry? How does the past inform the present? How are we influenced by the memory of other people or the history of our families? What landscape do you cherish the most? And what are the most important stories to preserve? And those are, pretty big questions, but again, to keep these in mind. And I do want to say that I make this, the PowerPoint available in PDF. I can send it to Leah and she can email it, to people, so people can have this, because it does have a bibliography at the end. And there's a lot of information that we're going through. So if people would like that, we can do that. And this, going back again, this instinct about being human is to tell our stories, the stories of those who have shaped our lives, in order to find out who we are and what it means to be human. And, I teach a lot of literature courses, philosophy and literature courses, as well as writing courses. And, this core question of what it means to be human. And that's really what we're trying to figure out, through our stories, whether it's there on the surface or not. It really comes down to just defining, what it is we're doing on this earth. And these are some pictures. Grandparents, that me and my older sister in the top middle. I've got that little scowly expression. And this captures my sister and I so well, in terms of, I was just sort of this real tomboyish, like ragamuffin kid. And my sister was always, in her nice shoes and the pretty hat. And the woman on the right was my grandmother, my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, who died very young. She died when she was 32 years old. She had an undiagnosed heart ailment, just out walking with a friend up in Indian Lake, New York, where they spent the summers. And she's somebody who's really captivated my imagination. And I've actually have been doing a lot of writing about her. There's not a lot of information. There's a lot of absences, and I'm exploring what those absences might mean. Here's another quote, William Kitteridge. What we are is stories. We do things because of what is called character, and our character is formed by the stories we learn to live in. Late in the night, we listen to our own breathing in the dark and rework our stories, and we do it again the next morning and all day long through the looking glass of ourselves, reinventing our purposes. Without storytelling, it's hard to recognize ultimate reasons why one action is more essential than the other. And this is this idea about the situation and the story. And, and I want to say also, if people have questions, you can put them in chat while I'm going through this. Vivian Gornick is a really important writer for anyone who's interested in really delving into family stories and memory. And there's a book titled The Situation and the Story. And she says the situation is the context or circumstances, sometimes the plot, but the story is the emotional experience that preoccupies the writer, the insight, the wisdom, the thing one has come to say. And often we don't know what we're need to say. But this idea that we've got facts, we've got birth dates, we've got specific geography, to go back to, and my family lived here, or my parents did this and that and the other thing. We've got data, we've got genealogical information, but the story is the emotional truth and wisdom that's discovered in the telling of the story, right? And that's the exciting part of it, I find. And it's interesting in terms of emotional truth. All of us have probably had experiences with family members where we all experienced the same event, but the lens that we remember it through, it can be very different. I just was with my younger sister last weekend. We were talking about, the family, and she was like, didn't happen that way. And I'm like, well, that's my emotional truth. That's how I remember it. So there's always that back and forth. And I think that sometimes that can, people can be hesitant, perhaps, about delving into their emotional truth because of that critic that we all carry in our head, and worrying about family saying, well, no, it didn't happen that way. That's not true. But I think it's just so important to own your own emotional truth. We have memory from our emotional responses to events, and how that shapes us throughout time is very, very different than, let's say, another family member. So that's something, to give yourself permission to explore the emotional truth. Why is it that a story is important to tell, or what is it that I'm drawn to a specific family member that I want to write about? To think about that and just hold that and own it. And for me, this has been important. The absence of a story is the story that needs to be told. And some of you might be familiar with Terry Tempest Williams, writer. She's written a lot of nonfiction. When Women Were Birds, 54 Variations on Voice is a book that she wrote about her mother. Her mother was dying of cancer, and she said to Terry, I want you to take my journals, and this is where they are. And Terry, as the writer, okay, I'm being gifted with my mother's journals. Her mother was a really private person. And so her mother passed away, and a few weeks later, she went to the closet, and it reads, I opened the first journal, it was empty. I opened the second journal, it was empty. I opened the third, it too was empty. Shelf after shelf after shelf, all of my mother's journals were blank. And it's a beautiful book about a daughter discovering her mother's life. And it was really what it was meant to be, was her mother left those for her to fill on her own and to write her mother's life. So I think that many of us will find gaps of information. There's not a lot of information about certain people. And again, I said, with my maternal grandmother, there's a lot of just blank space about her. In a way that's very curious to me. And for me, there's a story in that of why that might be the case. So that's something to think about as well. If you hit a dead end and you're like, well, wait a minute, there's no information here. The quest, to find information, or the quest for the need to discover what it is about this person that's calling you, is sometimes a really wonderful story to tell. So the first writing prompt that we're going to do, and each writing prompt, I'll give you it's very quick, like 3 minutes, and then we go to a longer one at the end. The first writing prompt is about an artifact that from your family that you have, or that you remember, a photograph, for example, or a piece of jewelry, a piece of furniture. But here, Patricia Hampel, Memory and Imagination. It's from the collection I Could Tell You Stories, Sojourns in the Land of Memory. It's another book I really highly recommend. She writes, our most ancient metaphor says life is a journey, memoir is travel writing, then notes taken along the way, telling how things looked and what thoughts occurred, show and tell. But I cannot think of the memoirist as a tourist. The memoir is no guidebook. This traveler lives the journey idiosyncratically, taking on mountains, enduring deserts, marveling at the lush green places, moving through it all faithfully, not so much a survivor with a harrowing tale to tell as that older sort of traveler, the pilgrim who's seeking and wondering. And I love the use of the word idiosyncratic, because all of our stories have their own idiosyncratic elements to it. And that's important to embrace. Our story is not the same as the next person's. And again, from Ocean Vuong, there's a quote from his book. It wasn't until I saw the mood ring. His mother had bought a mood ring for herself and for her own mother, and for Ocean at a convenience store. He says, it wasn't until I saw the mood ring that I realized you were asking me once more to interpret another portion of America. It should be America, not American there. And so to think about, the idiosyncratic journeys that you and your family have taken, and what artifacts or ephemera do you connect to your family and stories that have been told, or that you feel need to be told. So with this, since we've got only about an hour, I'll give you about 3 minutes, maybe 4. So it's just a free write, focus free write. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about a family artifact that you're connected to, either in memory. You don't necessarily have, it doesn't need to be in your possession, or maybe it is in your possession. It's a photograph, a book, a piece of jewelry, some sort of heirloom of sorts. Just take a couple minutes to jot down some of the items. I mean, there's a list that you want to jot down. There's not just one thing. That some of you, one thing is going to come to mind, and that's going to be it. But for some others, it might take a minute or two to jot down some ideas. Don't think about why things are surfacing. Just no one needs to share. No one's looking over your shoulder. And after you've got a few thoughts down, take a moment and write down as much concrete and sensory detail as possible connected to one or more of these. Again, the feeling of something, the color, the scent. So I'm going to time you. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. And I'll give you about a minute's warning. Okay, so family artifact and sensory details. I'll give you another minute. Okay, so you want to wrap up the line you're working on. You can always come back to it. So next we're going to do a prompt on a family member. And here's a just a little excerpt from, again, Terry Tempest Williams. You can tell she's one of my favorite writers. And this is from Refuge and a Natural History of Family and Place. So again, highly recommended book. She writes a lot about the Southwest, part of the United States. Some family were Mormons, and generations and generations and generations of family from there. And so that's landscape is quite important to her. So she writes, our weekends were spent camped alongside a small stream in the Great Basin in the Stanbury Mountains or deep creeks. My father would take the boys rabbit hunting while mother and I would sit on a log in an aspen grove and talk. She would tell me the stories of how when she was a girl, she would paint red lips on the trunks of trees to practice kissing, or how she would lie in her grandmother's lucerne patch and watch the clouds. The men would return anxious for dinner, would cook over a green Coleman stove as Dad told stories from his childhood, like the time his father took away his BB gun for a year because he shot off the heads of every red tulip in his mother's garden, row after row after row. He laughed and we laughed, and then it was time to bless the food. After supper, we would spread out our sleeping bags in a circle, heads pointing to the center like a covey of quail, and watch the Great Basin sky fill with stars. Our attachment to the land was our attachment to each other. So in this next prompt, and again, I'll give you about 3 minutes or so. I want to imagine resting under the stars, surrounded by generations of family, and stories are being passed around. Now think of the family member who is most strongly connected to one or two or more of the items that you jotted down in prompt 1. So choose one of the artifacts, or maybe there are a number of artifacts from the same person that you wrote down. Write down what you know about that person or what absences are in place. What do you want to know? Right? Take a few minutes to describe the person from what you hold in memory or from the memory that others have of that other person, from stories that you've been told. Why do you think that artifact was important to them? And what did it symbolize for them? What might it have been a metaphor for, or for you, or for the extended family? All right, so now you're going to think of a family member. And 1, 2, 3, go. Give you another minute. Okay, you want to wrap up that line again? You can always go back to it. So the next prompt is on place. Some of you might be familiar with Barry Lopez, naturalist, writer, highly recommended. So he writes, "It is my belief that a human imagination is shaped by the architect it encounters at an early age. The visual landscape, of course, or the depth, elevation, and hues of a cityscape play a part here, as does the way sunlight everywhere etches lines to accentuate forms. But the way we imagine is also affected by streams of scent flowing faint or sharp in the larger ocean of air, by what the North American composer John Luther Adams calls the sonic landscape, and say by an awareness of how temperature and humidity rise and fall in a place over a year. My imagination was shaped by the exotic nature of water in the dry Southern California valley, by the sound of wind in the crowns of eucalyptus trees, by the tactile sensation of sheened earth turned in furrows by a gang plow, by banks of saffron, mahogany, and scarlet cloud piled above a field of alfalfa at dusk, by encountering the musk from orange blossoms at the edge of an orchard, by the aftermath of a Pacific storm crashing a hot, flat beach." So this next prompt, short one, and then we'll get into the longer one, and then we'll talk. So take a few minutes to write about the details and stories connected to a place in your family history. You know, what do you know? What do you imagine about this place based on family stories? What does the landscape represent? How might this landscape or this place, this house, could be a house, how is it symbolic of your family's beliefs and attitudes towards the world? And one thing you might want to try doing is asking yourself, what would this place tell you if it could speak? Write what you know, and also allow yourself to write what you imagine. You don't have to stick to just know as facts here. So again, I'll give you about three to 4 minutes on this. Ready, set, go. Another minute. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up again. You can go back to it. All right, so we have primed the pump for the longer piece. So this next prompt, I'm going to give you at the time close to 10 minutes to do this. So you've done the 3 short exercises. So there's a lot of language memory people going through you right now, which is wonderful. And that's why I do move sort of quickly through it, just so people won't lose that momentum. I want you to use the first 3 writing exercises as a foundation for memory and family. Think of a family story that you carry with you that specifically has shaped the way you view yourself in the world. And if that question is sort of, you're like, oh, I don't know what that, I can't conjure that up right now. That's fine. There's no rules here, but if you can do that in terms of a story that has shaped the way you view yourself in the world, that's great. And how might this story contribute to your personal, generational, or communal history? What you write can be related to what you've already written, or maybe something entirely new inspired by the thinking you've done. So it might be just you go off in a completely different direction. And yeah, I'll give you close to 10 minutes to do that. And then once we finish, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we're going to chat and see if people want to share what they've written or questions, and all that good stuff. So, yep. So you ready, set, go. Another minute. Okay. So you want to finish up what you're working on? Again, you can always go back to it. So with the last, say, 15 minutes or so that we have, I'd love for somebody to be able to share some thoughts or even just read something that they wrote. If somebody's willing to do that, or if there are questions that I can, if you're working on a project or thinking about working on a project, something that I can answer. Does anyone want to, just curious what people wrote about?
If everyone would like to unmute yourself so that if something pops up, you can you can speak as opposed to catching up with the mute and unmute, which we all do.
I guess one of my first questions, just out of curiosity, is are people actively working on stories right now, or are people thinking, yeah, Diane, you're saying, yeah, okay.
Yes. I am a genealogist for
Okay,
clients.
great.
I'm a professional genealogist.
Perfect.
I'm working on a book for a client, but this I was focusing on my own ancestors, which I rarely have time to work on.
Right, great.
And it really brought some stuff to the surface pretty quickly.
It does. It does.
My first one was my grandmother's watch. I was always really close to her. As I never saw her without her watch. Her wrist was tiny, but the watch was reassuring. I have it now. The crystal and winding stem are gone. I've often thought of having it restored, but I haven't done it. I'm torn. I want it to be all her.
Yeah.
And you just,
beautiful.
When you start thinking about it, you just pour feelings and they just pour out.
Right. They come up. Yeah. These prompts, it do bring up a lot of interesting memories, things that, that's sort of that emotional truth, right? That starts surfacing, which is really important, I think, when we're thinking about writing our stories. Is anyone else, Michelle? Yeah.
I have on my desk this object, which is a silver stamp with my father's initials on the bottom of it, J.E. And, it's interesting because I remember this stamp on his desk, and I know that it must have come from Europe when he escaped in 1939, Nazi Germany, from Berlin. And what prompted him to take something like this,
Right.
And so I have been writing a memoir, and I've written a lot. And now I'm at the place where I want to, I'm not sure, but I want to turn around and kind of do some more reflection on the stories I've written about. Well, I've written a good amount. And so looking at this prompt and then thinking about my dad, who I had incredible conflict with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we were so much alike.
Yeah.
I mean, he died young.
Yeah.
And so I'm always writing about, I end up writing about how he gave me my love of nature and how nature was his church. And when we would go on vacations, it would be like we were from California. They settled in California ultimately, and how it would be like a whole different father. because as I wrote about this, maybe it's just a page and a half. I don't know. I could read.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Yes. I think, yep. Okay. Go for it.
I don't know what I wrote exactly. My father spent much of his youth exploring what was presented to him in his youth. The Alps, the Mediterranean, the Danube, the massive cities built around those places. I've inherited that Wanderluster way. The stories he would tell me and the photos he took that told stories still stick in my memory. Funny, because in the day-to-day, I didn't really like my father. He was a hard worker. We had a beautiful home in Studio City over the hills from Hollywood, where my parents eventually settled. But my memory of my father is not a happy one. He was generous at times with his material, but I think that he was very protective of himself. He was tight. He was German, but he was a German Jew. But being a German Jew gave him a richer perspective, I think. He loved to be in nature, and he took his family there, my brother, my mother, and me. The four of us had many adventures together. The landscape invited calm and generosity of spirit. As I think about this now, perhaps I feel exactly, that's all I had time for, but
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh. Yeah, one of the things that I found also that's really helpful as a prompt is to write to photographs. You know, if you have photographs, to look at those and write a description or write about them. I think also, you know, and we all know, you know, if we're writers or we're working on projects, you know, they're just so big, you know, we've done a lot of work and sometimes they feel really unwieldy. And I think it's a nice breather almost to just do like a vignette, you know, just do a vignette, a vignette, you know, snapshot. And, you know, that can be, I think, really helpful also to unearth sort of more of an emotional truth that's there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, because to see this and then, yeah, it's a good prompt. And because I'm just, you know, when you're with your own family, you're so curious about
I know
how you were shaped and what formed you. And, you know, so this was fun. Thank you.
Good. Hey there, did you have a
David?
Hi. Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Listen, can you see me?
Yeah,
yes,
we can,
yes,
David.
yep.
Go ahead.
Okay.
It'd be great.
I often speak on our family's experience during World War II when we were interned in concentration camps in Idaho, because we were Japanese American. And I thought I'd share, and these are very painful memories, and often in a public setting, I have difficulty talking about it. But let me just share something that I wrote as part of my presentation. We were sent to a temporary detention camp in a fairgrounds, and we were given a horse stall to live in. So this is what I have written. We were assigned a horse stall that housed our family of 2 adults and 3 children under the age of 6. I have vivid memories of my mother crouched in the back of the stall, trying to console her 3-year-old son, who was crying fitfully. For days, my brother would not be consoled and would cry for what seemed like hours until he finally lost his voice. And I like writing to photographs because it helps me put myself in their position.
Right.
And I also find it difficult to think about painful memories that's associated with my parents, and especially my mother.
Right.
So there are times when I write about our family history that I can't continue.
Right. Yeah, I had mentioned the Meredith Hall, Without a Map, her memoir. There was that quote at the beginning of the presentation from her, and there are parts of that memoir that were really, really difficult for her. She got pregnant when she was young. She was shunned by her family. She was shunned by the town. It was really, really horrific. And she essentially went off with, quote unquote, without a map, and trekked through Europe, and then went into Turkey, and she was starving, and it was, it was pretty harrowing. But in order to write that, the memoir, parts of it that were really hard for her, she imagined as though she was telling the story to this wise, old, benevolent person that was sitting there with her. So she actually created a character to sit by her when she was writing some of the hard parts. And also, I have friends who have written some very difficult stories, and writing in public, in a coffee shop or a library, sometimes is really helpful, and not being alone in your home, and not being able to sort of get away from it. So that I think can be helpful. I know for me, sometimes writing in public, grabbing my laptop and going to a coffee shop. That was sort of pre-COVID, but I hope to get back to that. But now I'm sort of, I'm at my home office. But I think, imagining that somebody is there that you're actually telling the story to, and that's listening, that's sort of leaning into you, can be, especially with a story like that. And, or Michelle, writing about, parents who have come from Nazi Germany. I mean, there's a lot of intense history that we carry, in our families, and it's in us, it comes down. It's like we carry it in our bodies. So, again, that's, and, vignettes. Imagine you're telling the story to somebody, and understanding these stories all have value. And it's not just, about specific events or people, but it's also about being human. It's the human stories that we can give to, even if we just print it up and give it to a family member. So that's, I think that's important.
Thank you so much, Maura.
I have another question. How do you preserve the stories?
How do you preserve it?
Yeah, I was thinking of making, doing a narration with slides, and bringing a DVD.
Yep,
which
you can do
preserves
that.
It.
Yep. You can also, there are so many wonderful companies now that print books. There's, Ingram, there's Lulu. So you could turn a slideshow into a PDF and have it printed up in a book form. I think that's one of the things I'm doing right now for my nieces and nephew. It's more like a family project, but all my mom's old photographs, because my mom passed away recently, their grandmother that they just love so much, and she left behind some writing as well. So I'm putting those together, and I'm going to have them printed up and given to them, because if those photographs and memories stay in a box, they're going to get eaten by mice, or they're going to end up in the basement, and then there's going to be a flood, with stuff that happens, that the ways we lose things. And so I think I think it's really important to get something bound, and that you put on your bookshelf, and that you are able to give to other people, and that really sort of tangible form.
There are also historical societies and societies that are devoted to issues like that, that have journals and may be interested in an article or a series of articles on your experience.
Yeah, that's a really, thanks, Diane. That's a really good suggestion.
And not
one thing I like about doing a DVD or an iMovie is that it records my voice, read you and listening to the voiceover rather than reading a transcript.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Some societies now, I know our State Genealogical Society here in New Hampshire is now, when we publish an article in our journal, we also do a YouTube video interview with the author. And so both versions are preserved. Lord knows for how long, the way things are moving technologically.
Right.
Yeah, and what I was going to just interject real quick, because we are coming to our window, that Maura, without overextending you, you did mention that you are glad to field people's questions.
Sure. Yes.
Or to look at anything that you feel like you would like to share with her. Right. So I will have Maura's contact information on, I can either send it to you all individually, but otherwise I will post it below the recorded this presentation, so it'll be on our website. And that's a great place, you know, if anyone here wants to get in touch with me so that I can help a little bit. But you know, it's wonderful to talk with people who are in a field that you either are in or you want to be in. You know, there are so many great resources out there. So so we really
and I'll send Lee, I'll send you a copy of the PDF. So maybe if people are interested, because it's a small group, so you won't be inundated, you know, but if somebody wants a copy of that, you know, just to have those prompts. And there was also a bibliography at the end of, you know, suggested readings.
Yeah, and I know there are several people who will be viewing this.
Right. Yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I extend that, you know, I'm a teacher at heart, so I really, you know, I welcome, you know, people contacting me and having, you know, asking questions or sharing what they've written.
Do you edit? Are you an editor? I mean, do you read something and you know?
I have in the past. Right now, I've got my own project that I'm focusing on, but if you're interested in finding an editor, I know a number of them. So, you know, if you've got somebody, right now, my project is sort of, not overwhelming me, but it's like
busy.
How about all consuming?
It is all consuming. Yes, it is. All right. Well, it was so nice to talk with all of you, and maybe we'll meet again at some point. And it's just great, you know, keep writing your stories. And from what I've heard just in this last hour, there's some pretty amazing stories to tell. So good luck with those.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for the inspiration.
Yeah, Leah, thanks so much for inviting me. And I'll actually I'll turn it into a PDF and I'll just shoot that to you in an email.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming and joining us this evening. Hi, Mary Ellen. And Donna says thank you.
Hi, Donna.
All right.
All right.
Have a good
Thanks
evening,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.